Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 639, Wanted 2. Get ready to depart. Lazarus's voice quietly echoed as the fog began to spread. Though his voice was calm, the gravity it contained was hard to miss. Splash! Splash! At the same time, statues continued to emerge from deep within the water, climbing onto the port and onto the ship. Careful! Watch out! Clank! Sparks flew as the sound of metal clashing against stone echoed. The situation reversed within just a few seconds as Lazarus, the one responsible for all of this, looked in Anne's direction. His gaze was hazy as he looked at her, occasionally flickering between clarity and haze. The sight left her slightly unsettled. While I do have faith in your ability to take on the Luminarch in a one-on-one situation, this is still the Temple's land. More reinforcements will be coming soon. The best course of action for us is to leave this place as soon as possible. I am of the same opinion. Anne readily agreed, then turned with a cold glare toward those who had betrayed her. Their faces had gone pale beneath her gaze. Don't bother with them. She was just about to act when Lazarus stopped her. What? You'll end up wasting time. Lazarus's eyes turned even hazier as he looked towards the fog beneath. I need you to remain here to keep the Luminarch in check. I'll take care of the rest. He won't move if you don't move. And wanted to refute his words. She didn't like the feeling of being commanded. However, taking into account his words, this was indeed the best course of action. Her power was about the same as that of the Luminarch. If she moved, so would he. In that sense, she had to remain still and hope that the merchant would resolve the situation on the ship. But would he be able to? And clenched her teeth before mumbling. Fine. And understood that this wasn't the time for her to get upset over matters like this. She ignored her surging feelings and focused her attention on the distant Luminarch. Although she couldn't feel his presence, she knew he was still standing in the same exact spot he was previously in. Her eyes narrowed as her entire body tensed, ready to strike at any given second. Clank! Clank! Meanwhile, the sound of fighting continued to echo. Lazarus stared at the scene and flicked his hand. Several threads shot up, attacking the spies planted by the Luminarch. Shio! Shio! His actions were quick and precise. Within seconds of him taking action, several spies were quickly disposed of as his eyes focused on a distant figure. He was fighting several spies, and he was somewhat familiar with them, having seen them within. He was a tall and burly man who fought with two large hammers, handling several spies at once. Clank! Sparks flew as he fought. He fought quite well with his hammers dancing across the ship. It was just unfortunate that he was currently outnumbered. Taking several steps back, Arnold glared at the spies before him. Bastards! Fucking sellouts! He never got his words out before the people before him fell limply to the ground. Slowly turning his head, he saw Lazarus flick his hand back to retrieve his threads. How in the world? Step! Lazarus's step gently echoed as he flicked his hand once again, taking care of several emissaries who were trying to climb their way up the ship. His threads were fast, and with the addition of Almighty's illusions, nobody was able to react to them. He was like a god of death, calmly walking around the ship while killing anyone who stood in his way with a single flick of his hand. The scene didn't go unnoticed by Anne as her eyes shook. This. From the statues to the strange fog, and now this. Just how powerful was this merchant? I need you to take control of the ship and start moving it back. Lazarus calmly whispered to the stunned Arnold, who was still struggling to make sense of the situation. We don't have much time, so I need you to do it now. Yes. Snapping out of it, Arnold immediately got into action as he shouted. Retrieve the anchor. Retrieve the anchor. His loud voice echoed throughout the entire ship as the remaining crewmates followed his orders, moving towards where the anchor was as a rattling sound soon followed. They're trying to leave. Stop them. The spies tried to stop them, but it was useless. Splash! Splash! More and more statues appeared, climbing onto the boat and forming a long line that stopped the spies from moving forward. Rattle! What is happening? What is? It was also just as the anchor was being pulled up that Inez got out from beneath, looking at the unfolding chaos with a look of shock. He quickly scanned the surroundings before he saw several emissaries from the Temple of Light heading in his direction. Attack him! What? Taken by surprise, Inez took a step back. It was also then that he saw the tip of a blade slash right at him. Inez was just barely able to dodge the sword as he leaned back, his eyes tracing the tip of the sword. What are you doing? He just managed to distance himself before turning to look at the emissaries. At the same time, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a golden medallion, its surface engraved with the insignia of the sun. See? I'm with. Swoosh. Inez's words were with the single slash of a sword as his pupils dilated and he tapped the floor, just barely avoiding the sword again. What are you doing? His expression changed again as he looked at the emissaries. He pulled the medallion again. I'm on the same side as you. Io. If you're from the same side as us, you should just die and make our lives easier. What? Stepping forward, the emissary raised his sword once again, his eyes narrowing. You don't understand the situation, do you? His voice was deep as he glanced past Inez, noticing another emissary emerging behind Inez. A smirk tugged at his lips. Whether you are part of the temple or not, you must die. This is a direct order from the Luminarch. You've been abandoned. Making eye contact with the other emissary, the two slashed down at the same time as Inez looked at the scene with a blank look. The temple abandoning him? No, that wouldn't make sense. How could they abandon him? He was one of the most devout believers. Was it because he displayed his medallion? But he had to. If not, they would have attacked him. It wasn't like he revealed his position as team leader. Inez's thoughts started to spiral as he forgot all about the situation. Ifil. Thump. Thump. Inez's thoughts were broken by several thuds as he looked up to see Lazarus staring at him from a distance, his gaze hazy. The temple isn't on your side. Despite the chaos around and the fact that he wasn't close, his words still managed to reach Inez. They're here to get you. But get a grip. Right now, you're my assistant. Whether you can kill them or not is irrelevant. Just don't throw your life carelessly. Lazarus turned his head away shortly after as he flicked his hand, killing several emissaries at once. Inez raised his hand, trying to reach for him and get some words out, but the moment he tried, he found that his voice was gone. He felt lost. Fight against the temple? He couldn't. They were his everything. The meaning of his existence. How could he fight them? His life was theirs. If they really... Ugh. My head. Inez clenched his head while scrambling back. He looked completely lost. The scene didn't go unnoticed by Lazarus as he quietly shook his head. He began to question whether he had made the right choice in selecting Inez. Still, he sensed there was likely more to Inez's behavior than he yet understood. There had to be a reason for his obsession with the temple. Lazarus was curious, but he understood that this wasn't the time for him to think about it. Human, I can't hold on for much longer. Upon hearing the Mind Hive's voice, Lazarus noticed the number of statues steadily dwindling as the emissaries and spies joined forces to take them down one by one. Get on the boat quickly. Quickly get on the boat before it moves. The anchors are up. Get the boat moving. Utter chaos unfolded on top and outside of the boat as many emissaries moved past the statues and jumped onto the boat, climbing their way up. The situation was starting to turn for the worse. Thankfully, only half of them leapt in the right direction, many ran the wrong way, and others plunged straight into the water. What's going on? Lazarus looked up, his gaze falling on the owl above before pulling his eyes away. Looks like the ship is finally starting to move. At that moment, he felt the ship finally begin to pull away from the dock. That was also the moment he felt a tremendous pressure bear down on the entire ship. Yukok, what's going? Several people slumped to the ground under the terrifying pressure. And as Lazarus slowly turned his head, his gaze fell on the radiant white figure that stood atop the fog, his finger floating in the sky as his glowing white eyes fell on and who forced a smile. The Luminarch. He had finally made his move. Shit. With her grip over the whip tightening and didn't waste a second. With her back tensed, she cracked her whip through the air, striking at the hovering Luminarch. A thunderous clap reverberated in the air as the whip streaked through the air, appearing right before the Luminarch. And then, bang! A thunderous sound reverberated throughout the surroundings as a shield formed in front of the Luminarch, a circular wave of pressurized wind spreading throughout the surroundings and forcing the ship to rock back and forth as large waves formed. Whoa! Several people lost their balance in the terrifying wind. That was until... Tap! Lazarus gently pressed his foot against the ground. Step of suppression. Immediately, the water calmed and the ship settled. As the chaos settled and the waves stilled, the Luminarch appeared unharmed as he glowed radiantly while suspended in the sky, looking like some sort of angel of judgment. His glowing eyes bore down on Lazarus, who remained unmoved, his gaze turning even hazier. Eventually, his lips pulled into a smirk, a dark membrane forming beneath him as it slowly enveloped the area around him, a stark contrast to the radiance from the Luminarch. All eyes fell on the two. Everything came to a standstill. Chapter 640, Wanted 3. The water surrounding the ship rocked back and forth, waves rising and falling in uneven patterns. And yet, in spite of the large waves, the ship remained completely still. As though it were completely unaffected by the waves. All eyes were on the two figures that stared at each other. One hovered in the sky, glowing with a radiance that rivaled the distant white sun, while the other stood firmly on the ship, his gaze steady as a black film slowly unfurled from his body. Their momentum slowly built up with each passing second, the pressure coming out from the Luminarch slowly starting to expand and overtaking that of the merchant, who appeared indifferent to the losing momentum. But then, Kacha! A sharp crack split the air as the long tip of En's whip lashed out, stopping just short of the Luminarch. Bang! The shield around Jophiel rippled, faint cracks forming as he managed to block En's whip. He casually lowered his head to look at her as she looked back at him. She shook her head. For some reason, I'm getting pissed off. I should be the one you should be paying attention to. Right? Jophiel's eyes squinted. Indeed, realistically speaking, Anne was supposed to be the greatest threat as she was a Tier 8 user just like him. And yet, for some reason, staring at the merchant, Jophiel felt more unsettled. He was certainly weaker than N. That he didn't doubt. And yet, his calmness and tricks made him incredibly alert. As Jophiel looked at N, he started to wonder. Was she really the biggest threat? Ha! I don't really like that expression of yours. As if guessing his thoughts, and laughed with her teeth clenched. She felt quite a bit underestimated. Was all the reputation that she had built up over the years for nothing? The thought of being dismissed so casually infuriated her. Her hand rose once more and her emerald eyes shone. Then, with a swift flick of her wrist, the whip snapped toward the Luminarch. Kacha! The whip shot through the air once again, striking at the Luminarch in the air as he dismissed her attack, the shield around him rippling again. He was just about to speak when his face showed signs of change beneath his golden mask. CRA crack. The cracks that had been present just a moment prior started to expand rapidly. They moved fast, spreading around the entire shield before everything shattered. A glass-shattering sound echoed in the air as the Luminarch looked at the broken shards of what was once his shield. He blinked his eyes slowly before looking down at and spotting the faint glow in her emerald eyes. Those eyes. It was those eyes of hers that were threatening. Jophiel had full confidence in his shield, a superior-ranked spell known as Goddess Protection. It was an exceptionally powerful spell, capable of forming a barrier strong enough to withstand most attacks from opponents of the same tier and even some from those above. For it to be broken like this, it could only be due to Anne's eyes. Not only did she spot the weakness of the shield, but it also enabled her to directly attack the same spot with unnerving precision. This was a bit of a problem, but not one that Jophiel found too troublesome. If her eyes are the problem, I just need to make sure she doesn't see anymore. He raised his hand and looked down. Then, with a simple snap of his fingers, his entire body glowed. Swoosh! A brilliant white light burst out from his body, covering the entire surroundings and even the dense fog beneath. Ugh! My eyes! Screams echoed throughout as the brilliant light that rivaled the sun's brilliance burst out from Jophiel's body. Celestial Grace. It was another superior-ranked spell. One capable of blinding the nearby surroundings and turning those weaker blind. Ahoy! The screams beneath showed just how powerful the spell was, and as Jophiel looked down, he saw Anne's eyes turning red as she hastily looked away. Ugh! Even she started to scream as she covered her face with her hand. Jophiel didn't miss the chance. Seizing the opening he had created, his body vanished from where he stood and reappeared in an instant before and she didn't even have the time to react before he extended his hand and a massive sword of light appeared. He looked at her directly and slashed down. Swoosh! A brilliant hue burst out as he slashed. His actions were quick and ruthless, leaving no room for Anne to dodge as she covered her eyes with her hand. But even though she couldn't see, it didn't mean that she was helpless. KH. Groaning, she raised her whip and lashed out in the direction of Jophiel. She might not see, but that didn't mean she couldn't hear. Bang! The two weapons met and a terrifying sound echoed. Ahoy! Help! From crew members to spies and emissaries, several people were thrown overboard as the moving ship began to lurch violently back and forth. The aftershock of the attack was simply that powerful. Right after blocking the attack and took the chance to create some distance between her and the Luminarch before taking several deep and ragged breaths. Ha! Ha! Shit, he's really strong. Her eyes were still hurting and her hand was numb. The situation was actually quite disadvantageous for her. However, it wasn't as though she had an option but to fight. It was either she died or he died. She had no other option, and as her breathing started to stabilize, she raised her whip again, ready to strike once more. But just as she was about to do that, a certain hand pressed against her shoulder. You can stop. And was stunned to see the merchant standing right behind her, his hazy eyes locked onto the distant Luminarch. Stop? What? Anne's brows furrowed tightly. What do you mean, stop? If we don't? Take a look around you. Lazarus pointed at their surroundings. Do you really think that the ship will be able to last if you two continue to fight like this? It was only then that Anne became aware of her surroundings, spotting several of her crew members injured on the ground, while the ship itself bore visible damage across multiple sections. Shit! Anne's face fell when she noticed the situation. She had been so preoccupied with the fight that she forgot to take into account her ship and crew members. If she were to really continue the fight, then the ship would quickly sink. She couldn't afford to have that happen. This ship of hers. It was extremely valuable. But what other option do I have? I'm sure his goal is to destroy the ship so that we don't move away. Even if I try to take things away, he'll just stay here. He's also trying to kill us. It's not like... I understand. The merchant cut through her words, pulling his hand away and taking a step forward. That's why I'll take it from here. What? You. And made a weird expression while looking at the merchant. While it was true that he had shown several impressive things so far, she still didn't think he was that strong. He was significantly weaker than her and the Luminarch. What could he even do? Yes, me. But as opposed to her, the merchant looked completely calm as he settled his gaze over the distant Luminarch. Once again, their eyes locked. But as opposed to before, the merchant's eyes were clear. They were no longer hazy. And the change didn't go unnoticed by the Luminarch as he raised his brow. Something about his current demeanor seemed different. It was almost as though an entirely different person had appeared. What? Julian's eyes closed. I might need to borrow some of your mental strength. This might be a little dangerous. It's all right, human. I understand the situation. I hope you succeed, otherwise neither one of us will survive. He was currently speaking to the hive mind. Listening to its words, his lips gently pulled up as he closed his eyes. He stood in silence, the world around him fading completely. Everything came to a standstill. Everything but the pain in his head as his lips began to tremble. At this very moment, his surroundings turned completely dark as he tuned out all the noise around him. He stood within the darkness, his mind drifting towards a certain past. A certain memory. Ah! Eventually, multiple white dots appeared around him. They surrounded the dark world like stars. Julian stared at the familiar sight. This was exactly how it was back then. Back when he caught a glimpse of the source. Though he still couldn't access it, he hadn't forgotten the experience. The way everything flowed together and the feeling it left behind. He remembered everything, and gradually he tried to replicate it. He tried to bring back that familiar feeling. Julian felt his mind prickle again. The pain grew sharper. He also felt his own consciousness starting to fade. However, he didn't care. He just focused on the sensation he had once felt. That deep and unfathomable sensation that made him feel as though he was completely in control of his body and mind. The more he delved into that feeling, the more his consciousness faded. But at the same time, his control deepened. He felt certain feelings boil within his mind. 6 different colored orbs appeared. They expanded into multiple ones, each one circling around him as he stared at them. He could feel something while staring at them. They were dangerous. There would be no going back the moment he tried to replicate the power. But this was what he had been looking for the entire time. He had to tap into it even though he wasn't ready. This was the path he had chosen. And so, Julian raised his head and looked around. He stared at the scene. Took in the scene. And then, he opened his eyes. The world around him changed in that moment. The moment his eyes opened, he saw colors. Bright colors appeared within the bodies of every single person who was within his sight. In particular, his gaze fell on the luminarch in the distance. With sword in hand, he appeared to be preparing something, but Julian didn't care. His eyes were too focused on the multiple orbs within his chest. He could see a red orb within his chest. It was greater than the other orbs. Then he also saw a purple orb, but it was relatively smaller than the rest. Green, too. Julian licked his lips before he raised his hand. Then, he pushed his hand up. The purple orb grew in size. Chapter 641, 5th Level, 1. The Luminarch had experienced many things in his life. He had clawed his way up to his current position. He had made many sacrifices and met many more powerful people. He thought he had seen it all. That he had experienced it all. But then, right at this very moment, he felt an uncontrollable feeling well up from deep within him as he stared at the figure standing behind him. From the moment his eyes opened, something changed. Jophiel felt his entire body shiver under his gaze as his heart pressed tightly against his chest. No, I have to do something quick. His every instinct screamed at this moment. They screamed. Danger. And no, this makes no sense. He didn't understand what was happening, but he had to move quickly. Extending his hand, the sword in his grasp grew even brighter as his expression twisted and he took a step forward in an attempt to attack the merchant. But right as he was about to move, the merchant raised his hand and pulled it up in one single motion. What? Jophiel's feet came to an abrupt stop in that moment. He wanted to move, but found that he couldn't move at all. Ha! Ha! His chest rose and fell unevenly, his breathing growing rougher and rougher. Sweat started to form in his palms, his chest trembling even more as his legs remained glued to the wooden floor. Move, move, move! Jophiel screamed at his body. Told it to move, but as if he had lost complete control of it, his body refused to budge at all. What in the world was happening? Jophiel slowly raised his head to see the merchant staring at him, his clear eyes staring right at him. Right into him. Ah! That was when it suddenly hit Jophiel. Staring at the distant figure, he felt his breath leave his body. Why does he look so big? He took a step back. This time, his body listened to him. But the trembling didn't stop. Staring at the merchant in front of him, he felt a deep and primordial feeling within his body. He didn't understand it at first, but he soon understood it. Fear. Yes, he was feeling fear. Fear? Me. Jophiel tried to deny the possibility, but as his palms grew more sweaty and the heavy feeling in his chest grew, the feeling became more and more obvious, and as it sank into his mind, Julian's figure became even larger in his eyes. His pupils dilated and his eyes trembled. And no. He started to look pathetic. But this wasn't something he could control. He had long since lost his ability to control his mind. Right at this very moment, his mind was within Julian's control as the purple orb within Jophi's body rose uncontrollably. It expanded so much, completely overwhelming the other orbs within his body. Aha! Dash! His behavior didn't go unnoticed by those around as everyone stared at the scene in shock. What was going on? Was this really the Luminarch? For him to be rendered in such a state. How was it possible? Nobody could believe their eyes. But then they all turned towards the source of it all. Towards Julian, who stood indifferently before the Luminarchas. His gaze flickered continuously. Hazy. Clear. Hazy. Clear. Hazy. Clear. Hazy. Clear. It was a chilling sight, one that made many shivers. In this very moment, Julian appeared extremely terrifying. The purple orbs within the chests of those around him started to rise. This was an unintended effect of his actions. However, Julian couldn't control it. He was still not in full control of his powers. But this didn't matter to him. He had one goal at the moment, and that was to get rid of the Luminarch before him. To get the ship moving. Everything else was meaningless. As such, Julian continued to fiddle with the Luminarch's emotions. In this state, he felt in complete and utter control. He knew that the Luminarch was within his grasp. So was everyone around him. At this very moment, nobody could stop him. But at the same time, Julian started to feel it. He started to feel the slow and steady dissipation of his character. His eyes grew hazier and hazier. The clarity that had been present moments prior started to fade completely. At the very moment, Julian felt his consciousness starting to grow numb. He was starting to fade. He was threading extremely dangerous territories. But this was necessary. He couldn't afford to let go of this feeling as Lazarus started to take over. Be it Julian or Lazarus. They both understood just how important it was for them to hold onto the sensation. This sensation was the key to reaching the 5th level of emotive magic. This had been their goal their entire time, and so they couldn't let go of the feeling. All they wanted to do was cling to this feeling. Memorize it. Internalize it. And finally, embrace it. More and more orbs appeared within the bodies of all the people around him. Lazarus raised his hand. The orbs within a selected few rose. Like balloons, they expanded more and more. Lazarus wanted to see what would happen if he raised them more. And so he did. He focused his attention on a specific individual as he raised the purple orb within their body. No. As if sensing that they were being targeted, the man took a step back, but his body refused to move. Lazarus fixed his gaze on him. Or more specifically, the purple orb within his body. He pushed his palm up and the purple orb within the man's body increased. Lazarus continued. The orb expanded. Ahak. A sound akin to someone choking echoed. It spread throughout as Lazarus ignored it and continued to push things further. The purple orb increased in size. The man's face turned completely pale. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His entire body was trembling and his pants showed signs of leakage. It looked like he had been completely overwhelmed by fear. Lazarus stared at the result in front of him before settling his gaze back on the Luminarch. What would happen if he tried it on him? The thought crossed Lazarus's mind as he raised his hand. However, just as he was about to repeat the same thing, he heard Anne's frantic voice from beside him. The reinforcements from the temple are here. Get the ship to continue moving. Raise the shields. The moment her words echoed, Lazarus turned his head to see several groups of people appear from a distance. His eyes narrowed before turning back to the petrified Luminarch. He could still see some defiance in the Luminarch's eyes, and Lazarus thought about finishing him directly, but he stopped. His eyes grew even more hazy. Tack. He took a step forward, the sound of his step echoing throughout as he made his way towards Jophiel. What are you doing? The Luminarch's body tensed as he saw Lazarus walking up to him. No, not yet. Not yet. He needed just a little bit more time. He needed a little bit more time to escape the current predicament. He had panicked before, but he was starting to understand the situation. The man before him was an emotive mage. A terrifying one at that. As a tier 8 mage, Jophiel's mind was rather strong. It was only natural considering his strength. However, in the face of the man in front of him, it was all useless. Just what sort of mental fortitude had he reached? Jophiel tried to steady his mind, trying his best to pull the shackles away from his mind. But his attempts were futile as a soft voice echoed in the air. There's no point in struggling anymore. Jophiel's mind blanked at the sound of the voice as his head slowly lifted towards the merchant, whose eyes were even hazier than before. You should give up your meaningless struggle. It's over. No reinforcement is coming for you. Something about the voice felt enchanting. It pulled at his thoughts and mind. And eventually, snapping out of it, Jophiel felt a hand press against his shoulder. Why do you keep struggling? It's already over. You've lost, everyone can see it but you. All that's left is pain. And yet you cling to it like it means something. But it doesn't. Let go. End it. You'll finally feel peace, maybe for the first time in your life. The merchant's words resonated deeply with Jophiel. He thought back to his past. To how he had clawed his way towards his current position. To everything he had to sacrifice in order to get to where he was. He thought about everything and peace. When had he ever felt peace? Jophiel's mind was blank as he thought of such words. He tried to think about his past. About everything he had gone through, and regardless of how much he searched through his memories, he couldn't find one single moment where he truly felt at peace. Not once. And that thought completely broke him. Why do you keep pushing yourself like this? What are you hoping to prove, and to whom? Life was never meant to be a struggle. It's meant to be peaceful. Quiet. Isn't that what you've always wanted? Just rest. Let it all go. There's no shame in ending the pain. I'm here. I'll stay with you until the very end. The merchant's words slithered into his ears, soft and hushed like a devil's advocate coaxing him toward the edge with every whisper. So, what do you say? Why don't you? No. Jophiel's loud voice echoed as his eyes turned red. A tremendous pressure burst out of his body shortly after as the merchant was suddenly flung away. He didn't even have enough time to react before Jophiel went on the offensive, several magic circles forming around him as they shot towards the helpless merchant. Bang! Bang! The difference in power between him and the merchant was rather massive. He didn't even have enough time to react before being thrown off the boat and onto the pier. Ha! Ha! With heavy breaths, Jophiel didn't waste a second and dashed towards the merchant, attacking with everything he had. HAA! Bang! He was consumed with anger. His chest heaved up and down unevenly as he attacked the merchant with everything he had. Although he was slippery, he was still barely holding on. Die! 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 DE! Anger had completely taken over him. He was so consumed by it that he didn't even realize that Lazarus was nowhere near him. Everything before him was an illusion, and the people he had been attacking were none other than the reinforcements sent by the temple. Ah! Help! Someone stop him! Bang! As the chaos unfolded, a pair of hazy eyes stared at the scene from a distance as the ship sailed away. His eyes remained fixed on the luminarch in the distance, his eyes growing hazier and hazier by the second. Until all semblance of clarity faded. Chapter 642, 5th Level, 2. How's the situation? Not good. There's been severe damage to the port. Quite a lot of casualties as well. Jophiel's condition also appears to be rather severe. Two figures stood at the port, gray coats billowing in the wind as they took in the devastation before them. The area was in complete chaos. Shattered ships littered the water, storefronts lay in ruins, and bodies were strewn across the ground. It was safe to say that the damage was quite extensive. What exactly happened? Do you have any idea? Raphael asked, his expression clouded as he looked at the scenes. It had been an entire day since the incident had occurred, and he, alongside Dante, had been sent over to investigate the situation by the goddess Sanctum, the main temple of the goddess of light. I'm reviewing the reports, and it seems Jophiel was investigating one of the 7 lords, following a tip about her and a few others being targeted by the great primordial one. Right, I did read about that. Raphael's brows furrowed momentarily. The situation felt a little weird. Something about it felt somewhat off. Who exactly was the one who gave the tip? It appears to be Silas. Silas? Raphael had to rack his brain for a few moments before recalling who it was. Captain of the Crimson Wraiths? That's right. Him. The frown on Raphael's face deepened. And where's he now? Unsure. He was supposed to have been detained, but because of the chaos that unfolded here, a lot of the people stationed by the temple to look over him left to help. He was able to leave without any problems. That's so. Raphael clicked his tongue. It wasn't just his gut feeling that told him he was somehow involved, all the clues also pointed to the case. The only thing he was curious about was why Jophiel would want to get involved in such a case. He could have handled things better. But after a little bit of thought, the answer became obvious to him. He wanted more. Jophiel wasn't satisfied with his current position. He wanted more. He wanted a greater saying within the goddess of light's sanctum. As such, he took this chance to get rid of one of the 7 lords of the seas. This had been his primary goal. If he could control the seas, then he could most likely gain enough momentum and power to rise even further. Raphael, there's another interesting thing I'm picking up. Oh. Raphael leaned his head to look at the documents in Dante's hands. His brows rose shortly after. Wait, so the reports ended up being true? The targets in question were indeed targeted by Exe rule. Yes, it appears so. Dante's voice grew grave in that moment. It couldn't be helped. If the great primordial one had truly targeted them, then Jophiel's actions were understandable. That was because once the great primordial one set its eyes on someone, there was no escaping. The only thing they could do was wait for its inevitable arrival. If the targets ended up staying within the city, then this situation is a lot more complicated than I previously expected. Raphael mumbled, his face equally grave. He had originally thought that this had been some sort of power trip from Jophiel that had gone wrong, but very clearly, the situation was a lot more complicated than expected. Raphael grabbed several files from Dante and looked through them. 4 files appeared. Anne, Anaz, Silas, and Lazarus. 3 of the pages were filled with all sorts of information except the last one. Merchant traveling from afar. Raphael's eyes narrowed further as his gaze fell on the profile. There wasn't much information on the file besides the fact that he came out of nowhere, sold unique items, and was the one responsible for rendering Jophiel into his current state. It was precisely the lack of information that made him unsettled. But for him to be able to handle Jophiel and push him towards such a point, he's at least black grade. Yes. That was the highest grade that they could give to individuals whose powers neared the very top of the mirror dimension. Raphael slowly turned his head to stare in the direction of the sea, which was currently calm. He made a decision shortly after. They might be targeted by the great primordial one, but just in case, set up a bounty for them. A bounty? For how much? The highest possible level. This. Dante raised his head to look at Raphael, unsure of what to make of his words. However, thinking about the current situation and the mess that had occurred as a result of their actions, he soon nodded his head. Understood. I'll quickly report this to the sanctum. And? Dante's gaze fell on another profile. What about Silas? What do we do about him? Silas? Raphael thought for a moment before eventually mumbling. Same. Black grade. We can't afford to play games with this situation. Either part is guilty of something and I won't have them make a mess within the land of light. Raphael's gaze pulled away from the documents and back towards the sea, his eyes narrowing. That was until he recalled one of the profiles and his lips pursed. An ass. Why did the name sound familiar? He had read his entire profile and while his path was interesting, he was a nobody. Nothing noteworthy. And yet, for some reason, his name felt familiar. Why was that? Raphael rubbed his mouth before turning his attention back towards Dante, who was sorting out the papers in front of him. One more thing. Eh? Dante looked up, meeting Raphael's gaze. Try to find everything you can on the second profile. The one of an ass. Try to dig as much as possible. Splash. Splash. The red waves crashed against the hull as the ship cut through the crimson sea. It was silent on top of the ship, the remaining crew scrambling across in order to fix the damage that it had sustained in several areas while others recovered from their injuries. Standing at the bow of the ship, Lazarus's clothes fluttered as he stared towards the horizon, his hazy eyes never looking away from the distance. It was unknown what his thoughts were as he stood there. He had been standing like that for the past day and nobody dared to say a single thing to him. After everything that they had witnessed, who would even dare to approach him? At this very moment, his mere presence felt pressuring and just standing next to him felt suffocating. But there was at least one person who didn't appear to be affected. What are you doing? It was, and her voice a little hoarse due to all the shouting she had been doing. Her words were met with silence as Lazarus continued to stare into the distance. However, his gaze soon turned towards her. I'm checking the situation ahead. Oh! And looked into the distance, but found there to be nothing. The sea was calm and the world around was quiet. You don't have to stay here to check. We have several devices that we use in order to detect if there are any monsters within the vicinity. There was a reason why she was so carefree while roaming the waters of the Crimson Sea. Her ship was equipped with all sorts of relics that granted her the ability to detect distant monsters alongside several powerful cannons and a protective shield that could protect them from the attacks of powerful monsters. If not for the fact that half of her ship had been invaded by spies, they wouldn't have struggled so much the day prior with the Luminarch. They should have been able to sail away without much problem. Thinking about the crew members who had betrayed her, Anne's teeth clenched tightly. She had yet to get over that matter. However, there were more pressing matters at hand. Her heart grew heavy as she looked at the mysterious merchant. Although I don't believe his words to be true, Luminarch Jophiel mentioned that the great primordial one had set its eyes on us. Anne's face darkened at the thought. If that's the case, the best course of action for us is to immediately find land and get away from the waters. Lazarus remained silent while listening to her words. But there's one problem. It's that we can't go back. Lazarus finally spoke, finishing the sentence for her. Correct. And closed her eyes and nodded. Most of the shores fall within the goddess's domain. If we return that way, we'll be targeted by her forces. But we can't follow the coastline or move sideways into another region either. Those territories are under the primordial one's control. There existed only one safe route that wasn't controlled by the primordial one. It was the one that came from Virathanash to the remnant south. But there was also one problem with that. I'm assuming that the temple has set a bounty on us following the events that had unfolded not too long ago. In that sense, we'll probably be targeted by the other lords of the seas. Her heart felt heavy while weighing their current possibilities. On one hand, they could turn back only to be hunted by the forces of the Temple of Light. On the other hand, they might attempt to slip into regions beyond Panthea's reach, but those lands belong to the primordial one. The final option was to press forward, though that path would almost certainly lead to a confrontation with the other lords. In other words, wherever they went, they'd encounter trouble. Anne's heart felt heavy at the thought. However, Lazarus looked completely unaffected by the situation. Head forward. We'll go to the remnant south. But it doesn't matter if we encounter the other lords of the seas. Lazarus's voice remained calm as he looked ahead, his hair fluttering faintly. It is the only realistic route that we can take. Everything else is just suicide. Anne bit her lips but realized she couldn't argue at all. He was indeed right. Although extremely dangerous, the route ahead was the one they had the highest chances of surviving. The only thing she didn't realize, however, was the fact that this was the route that Lazarus had wanted to go from the very start. The situation. It had unfolded in a favorable way. Things could have been a lot better, but he took what he could get. But even then, in his current state, he wasn't sure he could fight against the other lords of the sea. His emotive magic had made a qualitative leap, but he was still not capable of tapping into such power freely. He needed more time to consolidate everything. In the meantime, Lazarus slowly turned his head to look at Anne. You. Anne turned her head and their eyes met. His next words left her stunned. Train me. Teach me how to fight in the water. Chapter 643, Training 1. Chapter 643, Training 1. You want me to train you? Anne was stunned upon hearing the merchant's words. However, thinking about it, his words made sense. If they were to truly encounter one of the lords during their journey, then realistically he wouldn't be able to do much. Information about his incredibly emotive abilities had probably already reached their ears. All they had to do was get into the water and his emotive abilities would slash significantly. In order to stand a chance against them, he truly needed to learn how to fight in the water. So, will you help me? And looks at him and sighs. What choice do I have? They were on the same boat right now. Literally and figuratively. The stronger he became, the better it was for them. That's good. Lazarus's lips curled faintly as he turned his attention towards the sea, staring at him and started to ponder their situation. The shortest time it'll take for us to reach the remnant south is 1 month, while the longest can be up to 4 months, depending on the situation ahead. Along the way, I expect we'll meet one of the lords halfway. That means you'll need to be ready by then, within the next month. The other lords weren't the only dangers within the sea. The Crimson Sea was fraught with all sorts of monsters. Along the way, they'd have to be careful of them. Although the ship had all sorts of ways to tell if there were monsters near them, it wasn't always going to detect them. Not only that, but they also had to maintain a certain speed. If the boat went too fast, then it would have a higher chance of attracting the monsters. Well, let's get started with your training. And looked at Lazarus up and down before a smile suddenly marred her lips. She was actually quite familiar with training new recruits. This process. She liked it quite a bit, and thinking about how he had ordered her not too long ago, she felt like she was going to enjoy this moment even more. Black circle. And pointed at the sea below. I won't go too hard on you at the start. For now, just jump onto the waters and start swimming. Lazarus's face remained the same as he looked at her. It was hard to read what his current feelings were, however, from the subtle twitch of his eyes, he did seem to be starting to regret his request. And smile turned into a smirk. What? You're already starting to regret it? Lazarus remained silent while staring at her. Eventually, he closed his eyes and shook his head. No, I don't. However, I'm having trouble understanding how this would help. I'm a mage. I dash. You think I don't know what you're thinking? And cut Lazarus off, looking back to see one of her crew members walking to her with a certain book in his hands. It was a blue book that appeared rather worn out. And grabbed the book and tossed it to him. Here. Catching the book, Lazarus opened to the first page where he saw a complex magic circle. His eyes narrowed as he counted the runes. 1, 2, 3. 18. There were a total of 18 runes. An intermediate ranked spell. This is an intermediate ranked spell called water breathing. Not only will it be able to make you breathe underwater, but it'll also give you the ability to speak. The spell wasn't anything big or secret. It was just the standard spell given to recruits who reached a certain level. The issue was that it was a water element spell, meaning that for those who weren't talented in elemental type magic, it usually took quite a long time to learn. Thankfully, and devised a very useful method to make them learn quickly. Go on, the water isn't going to get any warmer. Indeed, it was to have the trainees directly jump into the water and try to unlock the spell in such conditions. She found that most recruits managed to unlock the spell a lot faster this way. It wasn't necessarily because she was targeting the merchant, and as if understanding her intentions, Lazarus secretly sighed to himself before he started to remove his clothes. Woo-woo-at, and whistled the moment she saw him take off his clothes and reveal his perfectly chiseled body. His body was so perfect it almost seemed to be fake. This was the first time she had seen someone like this. It inevitably attracted her attention. Now that I think about it, he does look quite handsome. He also appeared to be the same age as her. And whistled again as Lazarus removed everything but his underpants. He merely gave her a glance before opening the book again and looking through the spell. Shortly after he memorized everything, he jumped into the water. Splash! And thus his hellish training began. Won that and enjoyed very much. Black circle. Meanwhile, in another part of the ship, on top of the wooden railing, staring at the struggling Lazarus as he swam in the cold red waters, an owl and a cat sat. What do you think? Almighty asked, glancing at the sitting cat next to it as it started to groom itself. Putting its paw down, Pebble looked at Lazarus. He's starting to lose sight of himself. If he continues like this, it's very likely that he'll remain stuck with this personality. So you felt it too. Almighty's tone was grave as it looked at Lazarus. Especially as it was still Lazarus's will. The two of them could both feel the changes happening to Lazarus. Pebble? If the situation continued like this, they were both afraid Julian would completely fade. But then again, the human is quite capable. He should know what he's doing. I'm sure he has some sort of plan to handle this matter. You think so? Pebble looked at the owl with a questioning look. Looking back, Almighty gave a simple nod. Yes. Well, if you say so. Though Pebble was still a little worried, he had been with the human long enough to know he was capable. Wait, worried? What? It's such an intriguing sight. In the midst of his thoughts, a certain voice echoed and the two turned their heads to see a small crab looking at them from below. A crab? Pebbles narrowed before a thought struck the cat. Could you be? Yes, that is me. This form is just a lot more comfortable for me as it allows me to move better. The crab was none other than the hive monster that had helped Julian not long ago. Seeing it like this, both Pebble and Almighty were thrown off. Not for long, as the crab looked at them with an intrigued expression. I've seen a little from your memories, but you must be the three that was able to rank up because of the human. Almighty's eyes narrowed a little after it heard the crab's words, but it soon nodded its head. That indeed is me. The owl didn't detect any hostile action from the crab. From the looks of things, it really just wanted to have a conversation with them. Moving closer, the crab sat on the wooden railing with them as its gaze fell on the struggling human beneath. In the distance, they could hear and shouting. Faster! Faster! You're too slow. Keep focused. In her hand was a whip. Wait, a whip? Gotcha. The water split apart as Lazarus picked up his pace. Oh my! The crab looked at the scene with worry. However, it was to its surprise that neither the cat nor the owl looked at all worried. As if noticing its expression, the owl answered. This is nothing. He's gone through much worse, and he likes it when pretty older human women hit him. Yes, yes. Pebble nodded alongside him. He must be happy right now. Gotcha. Do you want more? Faster. See? Pebble raised its paw, pointing at Lazarus while shaking its head. Look at him slowing down. He's loving it. Indeed, looking down, the crab saw the human slow down. Gotcha. The whip struck the area next to him. Oh! The crab had nothing else to say. It wasn't familiar with how humans reproduced or attracted mates. This was, most probably, their way of doing so. It felt weird to it, but different races had different means. On another note, the crab looked at the cat and the owl. I saw that the two of you have names. How did that happen? Our names. Pebble and Almighty looked at each other. Then, their expressions started to twist, their eyes squinting and mouths curling into devious grins. It merely lasted for a split second before they returned to their usual and indifferent selves. Turning slowly to the crab, Pebble nonchalantly looked at it. Oh yeah. The human gave us names. It's some sort of custom they have. It's to pay homage to us in their own way. Oh? Oh. The crab listened with interest. Nonchalantly licking its paws, Pebble continued. My name is a rather respected one. It may just seem like a carelessly thought-out name, but it holds great meaning. In the human language, it means power, strength, and unity. Oh. The crab was fully invested now as the owl nodded quietly. The same goes for me. The owl's tone was even more nonchalant. My name, on the other hand, is more obvious. The mighty in my name is there to display my absolute might. Oh. The crab raised its claws, fully invested. It was so invested that it didn't notice the changes in the two animals' faces as their lips pulled further up. Finally. It was finally time for someone to suffer the same fate as them. They had been naive in the past, completely oblivious to the human's sinister naming sense. By the time Almighty realized it was too late, the name had stuck. Pebble, on the other hand, had been promised a name change, but it never happened. The pain. The suffering they went through as a result of their names. Do you want a name? Pebble's chest heaved as he looked at the crab, who looked back at the cat. Name? Me. I can. Of course you can. I've spent enough time in the human world to have learned their customs and naming sense. I am more than qualified to give you a name. He indeed is. Almighty supported from the side. Pausing for a moment, the crab looked at the two and could see the sincerity in their eyes. A name, huh? It never really thought about it. However, it didn't sound too bad. It was curious. What would its name be? Therefore, after a brief moment, it nodded its head. Yes, I would like a name. Kekekek. Kukukukuku. The expression of the owl and cat contorted even further as the two looked at their vict crab gloatingly. Then, after a brief pause, Pebble spoke. Wobbles, Kook. That will be your name. Chapter 644, Training 2. Splash. Waves crashed against the ship's hull, sending a spray of seawater across the deck and splattering against a pair of immaculate black boots. And stared towards the water as a figure appeared, swimming through it without a struggle. He was also keeping his head down the entire time, no longer needing to turn his head to take in fresh air. Her grip over the whip loosened slightly as she looked at the scene below. Not bad, he's improved quite a bit over the past several weeks. One could argue that the past several weeks had been hell for Lazarus. Waking up early in the morning before even having breakfast, he was thrown off the ship and forced to follow the ship while swimming. The first few days were the worst. Because he wasn't used to swimming and his form wasn't very good, his pace was quite slow. In order to keep up with him, the ship had to slow down. This reduced their speed significantly, in turn making their trip to the remnant south longer than it was initially intended to be. Thankfully, the waters were rather tranquil and most of the surrounding monsters stayed clear away from the ship. But to Lazarus, the waters felt incredibly dangerous. He could hardly see ahead, and besides the ship, it almost felt as though he was alone in the middle of the vast ocean. It was an unnerving situation. One that he forced himself to go through as his speed increased with the coming of days. By the time it took for him to unlock the spell, water breathing, over a week had passed. The true change happened then. With the ability to breathe underwater, he was able to increase his pace quite significantly. The ship also moved faster as a result. Furthermore, by constantly using the spell, water breathing, his mastery over it increased just ever so slightly. It didn't take long for him to use the spell as though it were second nature to him. Thankfully, because his knowledge of spells and runes had increased with the time he spent in the world, he was able to unlock the spell within a week, which was considered to be moderately paced for an intermediate ranked spell. Still quite slow for someone of his level. Splash! Splash! With his arms fluidly moving into the water, Lazarus slowly turned his head to look a little back. His eyes paused on the figure that wasn't too far away from him. Lazarus wasn't the only one training. Anaz was also training the same way that he was. Of course, it wasn't because he wanted to, but because Lazarus had forced him to. It was all because of his stupid curiosity. On the same day Anaz found himself asking Lazarus what he was doing, he found himself thrown off the boat and forced to swim next to him. Damn it. Damn it. The only good thing about this situation was that he was more talented than Lazarus in swimming due to his more powerful physique. It was still a massive pain in the ass. Splash. Splash. The two continued to swim in the crimson-colored waters, their figures gliding smoothly following the ship. They continued to swim like this unit. A certain voice echoed from the top of the ship. Alright, that's enough for now. The first one to move was Anaz as he came to a sudden stop before kicking the water and jumping up, his feet touching against the surface of it as he dashed forward, his steps leaving ripples behind. Lazarus followed after, his hand pressing against the water surface as though it were made out of solid, and he pulled himself out of it. Then, with his legs resting against the water surface, he helped himself up and calmly walked towards the distant ship, his every step leaving a ripple behind. This was another spell that he had learned over the past several weeks. It was an advanced spell, and it was one that he had spent a long time trying to learn. Gliding. In order to use the spell, one needed to have absolute control over their mana, coating their bodies with a set of runes that enabled them to treat any surface as though it were a solid object. Because the spell had no specific elemental affinity, it was much easier to learn, but at the same time Lazarus understood that with the limits of his current talents, his rate of mastery was going to be extremely slow. Especially compared to curse-type spells. The same was true for water breathing. It would take a very long time for him to master that spell due to his lack of talent in the water element. But that was fine. He never intended to master the spells to begin with. He just needed the bare basics in order to put up a challenge against the other lords. Hurry up. You're moving too slowly. Overhearing En's words, Lazarus picked up his pace, eventually running towards the ship as he smacked his foot against the water and jumped onto the ship. Thud. Dry yourself. A towel appeared in front of him the moment he landed on the ship as he took hold of it and started to dry his hair. I see a lot of improvement between the two of you. And I'm rather surprised by your talent. You have a lot more talent in this aspect than this weird merchant in front of us. Have you ever thought of becoming a pirate? I have no interest in it. Anaz shook his head and quickly rejected her offer. My faith is with the goddess. I do not have any interest in becoming a pirate. I see. What a pity. An's focus then turned towards the merchant. Well, you're doing good too. It was very clear to her that he didn't have a lot of talent to be a pirate. What took others days to learn took him weeks to learn. The speed was fine, but at the same time she could see that it would be incredibly hard for him to reach higher levels with the spells in the future. He was just not very talented in these aspects, which was fine since he only needed to know the bare basics. Regarding everything else, nothing really needed to be said, as even Anne found him scary whenever she saw him train. While training in the water, Lazarus didn't neglect his regular training. He continued to refine his domain, trying to find ways to fully combine the two while at the same time trying to reach the 7th tier. He was just a little shy away from reaching the halfway point of tier 6. His rate of progress was incredibly fast, but he was still not satisfied. He wanted to grow faster. However, from the way things stood, he'd need at least a year or two before reaching tier 7. It felt slow, but he was on track with beating the woman from the Empire in terms of speed of progress. Her progress started considerably normal compared to others, but her true monstrous aspect came from her progression in the later stages of her tiers. It was almost as if she got faster and faster the more she progressed. Lazarus was on track with beating someone like that. But still, it wasn't enough for him. He wanted more. The two of you should go back and get changed for now. There's still quite a bit that you need to learn, but we're starting to cross the quarter point of the journey. We'll have to grow more alert from this point. I'm afraid that we'll soon be getting eyed by the other lords. Lazarus's expression flickered upon hearing her words. At his current strength, he wasn't sure if he could put up a fight against the other lords. Especially not if they joined hands together in order to fight them. Rather than waiting for them to inevitably come, it's best if we directly attack them. The thought crossed Lazarus's mind as he scanned his surroundings. It was much better to attack than to be attacked. They would hold the advantage then. Lazarus held onto the thought for now. They still had some time. He planned on training further in the meantime. I'll think about it more when the time comes. Taking a deep breath, Lazarus excused himself and moved towards his own room, closing the door behind him. Clank. As he did, he paused for a moment and stared at his own hand. It was trembling faintly. His lips pursed and his just barely faint hints of clarity appeared in his gaze. You better come before it's too late. Haven. It was busy in the academy. Time passed, and while not all wounds healed, the general mood had improved in a few people. At least for now. Hand in your papers. Your exams are over. As the professor's voice echoed through the room, several figures sat silently by the desk, their bodies entirely white, as though every trace of pigment had been drained from them. Eyes closed and faint smiles on their faces, they appeared eerily serene. The figures were Evelyn, Aoife, and Leon. Congratulations on finishing your theoretical exams. I wish all of you good luck for your upcoming graduation trial. Even as the professor left and so did most of the class, they remained in their seats with their bodies completely still. Eventually, Kira arrived before them and adjusted her glasses with her finger. I take it that you all bombed the exams. The three came to life the moment they heard Kira's words as their faces scrunched up. This was especially so for Aoife, who almost felt tempted to spit on the ground. She didn't because she had an image to maintain. Staring at Kira, she felt disgusted as she started mumbling things like, "Where's the Kira that I know? Since when did she get so good at studying? This makes no sense." Evelyn nodded beside her, repeating like, yeah. Makes no sense. I've even checked to see if she was possessed, but it doesn't look like it. Should I check again? What the fuck? Overhearing their conversation, Kira looked at them in disgust. She felt rather insulted. Then, her head slowly turned towards Leon, who was looking at the air absent-mindedly. He seemed lost in his own thoughts. Something that had been happening quite often lately. What's wrong with you? Only when Kira called out to him that Leon snapped out of it as he looked at her. It's nothing. He shook his head, reaching for his neck as he started to massage it. I was just thinking about the upcoming graduation trial. It's tomorrow, right? Yeah. Kira answered slowly, her head throbbing after thinking about the long journey that was ahead. From what they had been told, they'd need to stay in the mirror dimension and survive for several months. It sounded like such a pain. I see. Leon nodded faintly, his gaze turning unfocused for a brief moment. I see. Chapter 645, Training 3. The next day, several cadets stood in front of a massive dome-shaped building, its smooth metal surface glinting faintly under the overcast sky. The atmosphere was tense as they looked around. Today was an incredibly important day. Today was the day when they'd take their graduation trial. How are you feeling, cadet? What are your thoughts on the upcoming trial? Do you think it might be a little too harsh? Over here. Please look over here. There's been a lot of talk recently regarding the upcoming graduation trial by the Academy. It's unlike anything that has ever happened before. Do you think the Academy's decision to send you to the mirror dimension was a good one? Reporters swarmed along the sides of the dome-shaped building, clutching recording devices they eagerly thrust toward the cadets, their voices overlapping in a frenzy of questions and flashing lights. The event was no minor one. Graduation trials were usually like this. They were one of the most highly anticipated events where those who passed would at last become eligible for selection by the prestigious guilds or the powerful noble households. The Megrail family also hired, alongside the Mage Tower and the churches. To put it simply, it was a massive event that gathered the interest of a lot of powerful people. These cadets present. They were all future pillars of the Empire. And while the graduation trial usually tended to attract a lot of attention, this year it was a little bit different. This year, the Academy opted for a different format. One that was a lot harsher than before and also incredibly dangerous. Many thought that this format was too harsh, but the Academy didn't force anyone to participate. For those who didn't wish to enter the mirror dimension, they could take a separate trial with the other academies. However, such actions weren't exactly favored by the guilds and major powers, since one of the main reasons they hired cadets and recruits was to deal with the mirror dimension. So, despite the backlash the event faced, it also earned a fair amount of praise. Ah, Cadet Milne? Please look over here. Over here. The frenzy worsened the moment a white-haired figure made her way before the dome-shaped building, the reporters going even crazier the moment she appeared. Wearing the standard Academy uniform as her white hair bounced with each step, Kira's piercing red eyes fell towards the reporters. Here. Hello, cadet. Kira was pretty reputable within the populace. Not only was she strikingly beautiful, but she was also exceptionally skilled. As one of the few 5-star recruits among the third years, considered one of the most star-studded classes in decades, she stood out even among the elite. But she was also rather infamous. Kira wasn't well known for her interviewing abilities. In fact, she tended to swear a lot, with her most famous interview, "Suck My Balls," garnering millions of views. Over here. Still, many wanted to interview her just for that. They wanted to interview her to get a reaction out of her and gain a lot of views. Oh no! Staring at the scene from a distance, just arriving by the dome, Aoife's face paled a little as Evelyn also looked in the distance with a similar look of distress. The two had left alongside her, but she ended up moving faster than them, leading to this situation as they looked at one another. This might be bad. You think so? The two were more than familiar with Kira. They knew about her track record with the interviews. If the two allowed her to talk, then. Not good. What do you think about the recent trial? Any opinion? Kira stopped, her gaze turning towards the reporter who had asked the question, a short man with blonde hair that was neatly tucked to the side as his piercing blue eyes eagerly looked in her direction. Oh no! Evelyn and Aoife grew alarmed as they tried to reach for her, but it was too late. Kira's lips parted and she soon began to speak. I believe the Academy's decision was a prudent one. Considering that many of us have trained extensively to confront the threats and creatures within the mirror dimension, utilizing this opportunity to demonstrate our current capabilities is a fitting choice for a graduation trial. Who is this? What happened? Where am I? The faces of the reporters alongside Aoife and Evelyn blanked. Oblivious to the situation, Kira continued. I also view this as a personal challenge. A chance to test my limits and prepare myself for the path ahead. Therefore, if you ask me whether I agree with the Academy's choice or not, I will tell you that I agree. And with that, Kira nodded her head before moving towards the other cadets. Evelyn and Aoife stood numbly on the spot, just blankly staring in Kira's direction. Eventually, Aoife looked at Evelyn. We should call a clergy. I think you're unqualified to check if she's been possessed or not. Yes, I agree. Evelyn agreed with a dumb look. It's like the kids these days say. I'm washed. Yeah, for real. Overhearing the conversation from behind, Leon just blinked his eyes. Eventually, his face started to contort as he stepped away. Ever since Julian's death, all of them seemed to have lost a screw or two. Be it Evelyn, Aoife, or even Kira. They were all just weird. But eventually Leon shook his head. Quite a while had passed. Though they didn't show it externally, he knew that Julian's death had affected everyone. Evelyn and Aoife both became more cheerful while Kira became more mature. She stopped swearing as much and just buried herself in her studies. I guess it's only natural. Everyone had their own way of dealing with death. Leon, on the other hand, was the only normal one left. That was mainly because he believed Julian was still alive. He didn't have much evidence besides that strange incident from before, but that was enough for him. He believed that Julian was alive and that he'd eventually show up. It was just a matter of when. Silently sighing, Leon looked ahead where the other cadets were gathering, and he moved forward. Wherever he is, I'm sure he's torturing some poor soul. I just know it. For that, he could only silently pray for them and wish them the best of luck. Hopefully their worth isn't high, or he might just end up selling them. At the same time, standing at the bow of the ship with his hair lightly tousled by the wind and his gaze out toward the horizon, his expression distant and hollow. Oh goddess, if you can hear my plea, I beg you. Save me from this treacherous place. His face was also a little sunken. I have faithfully spread your word and strived always to remain loyal in my devotion. The black circles underneath his eyes weren't helping either. Please, if my voice reaches you, grant me your aid. I am in desperate need of your mercy. Save me from that wicked witch and merchant. Anaz placed his hands together while staring towards the white sun. What have I done to deserve something like this? Please. If you can hear me, save him. What are you doing? Anaz's face turned completely pale as he rigidly turned his face to see a figure standing not far from him, holding onto a whip as she looked at him. I didn't quite get what you said. What did you say? Anaz licked his lips, unconsciously taking a step back. I was offering prayers to the goddess, asking that she grant us her divine protection and shield us from any harm that may come our way. Is that so? Nod. Anaz quickly nodded his head. Yes, of course. I would never lie about such a thing. And smiled. Her smile was bright, but also beautiful. It was enough to stun the poor Anaz, who fell into a brief daze. But only for a brief one, as her cold words pierced his ears shortly after. Please, if my voice reaches you, grant me your aid. I am in desperate need of your mercy. Save me from that wicked witch and merchant. Reciting his words back to her, Anaz felt his body stiffen as his eyes started to tremble. Her smile. It didn't look so beautiful anymore. Anaz, my dear Anaz. I'm not your dear. Oh my. Anaz licked his lips. His entire body was shivering as he swallowed his saliva. However, just as Anaz raised her whip, a stern voice echoed. Stop. All heads turned towards the voice, revealing an all too familiar figure. Anaz's eyes glinted at the sight of him. Never before had he been so happy to see the merchant. Right as Anaz's lips parted to express his gratitude, he felt a small tug over the back of his shirt. Ha! He found his body getting raised as his eyes met those of the merchant. We've got training to do. Stop wasting time. Wah. Anaz's face paled as his mouth opened to say something. He unfortunately never got the chance to speak as his body was suddenly thrown off the boat. Hey! I curse you. I curse you. Splash. The crimson waters swallowed him shortly after. Unbothered by Anaz's shouts, Lazarus removed his shirt and pants and joined him right after. Splash. And thus their training resumed. Ha. PFDT. The moment the two jumped into the waters, the crewmates began laughing as they took in the spectacle. After almost a month in the same ship, everyone had grown somewhat familiar with one another. They had also grown familiar with the merchant and devoted believer pair. The two never failed to make them laugh, making their day just a little bit more enjoyable. Even Anne found the sight amusing as her lips gently pulled up. However, the smile didn't last long as she looked towards the horizon. Her face turned grim. For how much longer can the atmosphere remain like this? Anne knew better than anyone else that this was the calm before the storm. Things would soon get hectic, and whether they survived or not depended on the training that the two were having below. As such, Katja. Faster. Get faster. And became even stricter. Coerce you. But at the same time she focused most of her attention on Anaz. For some strange reason, whenever she whipped Lazarus, his speed slowed. How very odd. Chapter 646, Sinful Strait 1. Lazarus and Anaz's training continued for the next several days. Neither one of the two skipped a single day. This was mostly because Lazarus wouldn't give Anaz a single day off, but their efforts were slowly starting to pay off. Anaz was now a lot more adept in the water. He was almost like a completely different person. He could now go in and out of the water and remain there without any problems. He could now also fight without any problems. If the monster that he had encountered from before in the depths of the water showed up again while Inez couldn't guarantee victory, he was now a lot more confident in escaping it. His speed in the water had increased considerably. The same was true for Lazarus, although his speed was slower than Inez's. He just wasn't very talented in this aspect. But what he had managed to achieve was enough. We're going to be reaching land not far from now. The two of you should refrain from entering the waters for now. Anne's face was serious as she looked ahead. The waters were still calm, but they weren't going to be like this for long. They were about halfway through the journey to the remnant south, and soon they were going to have to pass through the Sinful Strait. Many islands lay scattered across the sea along their route to the remnant south. These lands were dangerous, not just because of the towering waves, but because they offered the perfect hiding places for the other lords to lie in ambush. In fact, many of the islands were used as bases for the lords. Anne also had an island to herself, but it was a little further up ahead than the current islands. To reach the islands, they had to navigate the Sinful Strait, a narrow passage just wide enough for their ship and an ideal spot for an ambush. It was a dangerous route, but one they couldn't afford to avoid. This path is the fastest path that we can take in order to reach the remnant south. If we deviate from our course, then there's a high chance we'll enter the Sirens' territory, and I'd like to avoid that. Sirens were powerful, mind-type monsters. Their strength varied widely, however. Among them were several terror-ranked Sirens and even one of Destroyer rank. What made them truly terrifying was their music, a haunting, otherworldly melody that could hypnotize everyone on board. There had been chilling incidents in the past, ships found drifting silently across the sea, fully intact, but with no crew left to tell the tale. They were the most enigmatic and scariest of monsters within the vicinity. If possible, Anne wanted to avoid them. Even if the merchant was present and he specialized in the mind path, she didn't feel comfortable encountering the Sirens. She believed they had a much better chance of surviving if they directly crossed the strait. Drying his hair with a towel, Lazarus walked towards her as he looked towards the distant sea. It was calm for now, but he could also sense the noticeable shift in the atmosphere. As the ship drifted in the sea, a certain tension started to rise in the air. He moved towards the bow of the ship and narrowed his eyes, extending his hand as in the distance, the figure of an owl appeared, landing on his hand. And looked at the scene in surprise. When did you find anything? No, nothing. Almighty shook its head, its eyes narrowing. There's a strait in the distance, but I wasn't able to sense anything while looking through the area. Everything looked in place, and even when I completely hid my presence, I felt nothing. Human, the situation is very strange. Why is that? Didn't you say that you felt nothing? That's the problem. Almighty replied, its tone grim. Be it humans or monsters or any living creature. Nothing. I didn't feel a single thing. It's almost as if all living things have been wiped out of that area. The situation is extremely dangerous. I would advise caution, human. Lazarus covered his mouth, his head lowering as he fell into deep thought. He had already been briefed about the situation by Anne. He more or less understood that they needed to cross this area in order to reach the remnant south. However, from the looks of things, the path ahead wasn't so simple. To go or not to go? Lazarus pondered over the matter for a while before he let out a long breath. I'll go check things out. What? Anne's surprised voice echoed from behind him. You're going? That's extremely dangerous. I know, but it doesn't really seem like I have much of a choice. This is in order to minimize all risks. I'm now comfortable enough in the water to be able to outrun any danger. Yes, but... And I'm also not going alone. Lazarus's head slowly turned towards a certain figure in the distance as he dried his hair with a towel. Feeling the merchant's gaze, Inez dropped the towel, despair starting to mar his features. No. Yes, you're coming. It wasn't like Lazarus was doing this to spite Inez or anything like that. In fact, it was anything but that. It was mostly because Inez was actually quite capable. Though he wasn't strong, he was faster than him in the water and was also extremely observant. Bringing him would make the situation a lot easier for him. Do I even get a choice in this matter? Why are you doing this to me? Blame yourself for being competent. Lazarus nudged towards the waters with his head as Inez opened his mouth to say something but eventually closed his mouth and sighed. By now he was just used to the abuse. His eyes grew dimmer. Oh goddess, if you could spare this one. His prayers always seemed to fail, too, as he moved towards the bow of the ship and jumped down. He started to regret. He started to regret ever taking money from this guy. How I wish I had never met him. Lazarus shook his head while staring at Inez's depressed expression. He was being overly dramatic. Perhaps because he had suffered a lot, but it didn't seem like Inez had yet to realize that he had grown considerably stronger since their first meeting. Lazarus could also see that it wouldn't be long before Inez developed his own concept. By then, Lazarus was sure he'd stop complaining. After all, this was one of the Inez's greatest goals. He had to do this in order to become a Luminarch. Are you sure you're fine going? Do you want me to come too? Listening to Anne's offer, the merchant shook his head. No, it's fine. You need to stay here and watch over the ship. If something does happen, at the very least, you'll be here to keep things grounded. You can slow down the ship for now. I'll come back as fast as I can. All right. By now, Anne had long stopped considering Lazarus and Inez as strangers. While she was aware that the two weren't part of her crew, it almost felt like they were. They were now all on the same boat, thus there was no need to treat them as strangers. Even the remaining crew members got along well with the two, with Inez being the favorite due to how pitiful he appeared. Go, just be careful. In case something happens, use this. And threw a small cylindrical item to Lazarus and he caught it. He stared at it in confusion. It's just a flare. If something does happen, you can use the flare and we'll come to your aid. I see. Lazarus pocketed the flare before glancing at the waters below. He didn't waste another second and directly jumped down, his foot pressing against the surface of the water as it rippled beneath. Inez stood not far from where he was, his head hung low. Inez followed him shortly after, his speed not any slower than his. I really do regret taking money from him. The sinful strait, once called the Sunda Strait, was a narrow and treacherous passage through the Indonesian archipelago. It had earned infamy over the years, not just for its violent tides, but for the countless ships that vanished within its waters, alongside the numerous pirates. Over time, the land had changed dramatically. The strait had narrowed. Its waters now funneled between cliffs that had grown taller and more jagged, like the jaws of a closing mouth. It didn't take long for Inez and Lazarus to arrive by the strait, but the moment they did, they both paused, their expressions turning grave as they stared at the massive crimson waves, each one slamming against the cliff walls with a deafening roar. The cliffs on each side stood towering above them as water splashed around, the distant strait covered in a strange fog that prevented them from seeing deep into it. Boom! Boom! The waves continued to smash against the cliffs as Inez turned toward the merchant, his expression grim. We're not entering that, are we? There was a subtle trembling in Inez's voice as he spoke. The more he looked at the strait, the more unsettled he felt. Lazarus also felt the same way as he did and pressed his lips together. His mind told him not, but at the same time he also didn't feel a single living thing within the strait. No life, no, nothing. Something was off, but he couldn't quite tell what it was. Boom! As another wave exploded by the cliffs, Lazarus looked back. Eventually, he waved his hand and cast lament of lies on the two of them, obscuring their figures completely. Let's go. He nudged his head towards the distant strait and moved towards it. Although he understood that something was off about the strait, he didn't really have a choice but to investigate. In order to reach the remnant south, this was the most optimal place for them to go. He couldn't afford to delay the situation. As such, making up his mind, he increased his pace as he moved toward the strait. If you don't want to go, you can go back, the merchant said without looking back, his figure moving closer and closer to the strait. And as opened his mouth, but looking back and seeing the empty sea, his face sank. He didn't even know the way back. Not only that, but going back alone somehow felt scarier to him. In the end, Inez could only stare at the merchant with a defeated expression. Ah, shit. Biting his lips, he followed the merchant from behind. He regretted so much. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.